All right, Eileen, we're live. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. To start, the floor is yours. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and give a little background for my audience?
Yeah, thanks, Connor, for having me. My name's Aylin. I'm a PR manager. I currently live in Istanbul, and I recently started my own PR business after I had worked in London for about 6 years, then in Istanbul for a couple of years, and before that in Germany. So now I'm situated in Istanbul, started my own business, and yeah.
And I always like to do this with my guests, so maybe we can like kind of back up to the beginning of your career. Have you always worked in PR? And if so, maybe you
Yeah,
could clarify that.
kind of. Well, I mean, if you ignore all the mini jobs and the part-time jobs I had as a kid, I started working in PR while I was studying in Germany. I was doing my undergrad in media studies, and I did an internship at a PR agency in Düsseldorf in Germany. So that's kind of my first touch point with PR, and I really liked what I did. I ended up working there for quite a while, actually, while still studying. And then I liked it so much that I actually decided to do my master's degree in PR and corporate communications in London.
And so, what is it about PR that you like so much or that intrigues you so much?
I think I've always kind of liked, working with many people, with different people, kind of having that feeling of being connected to different people as well, not just in one country, but in other countries as well. And I think working with global clients kind of gives you that opportunity to meet people from all over the world, be connected to them. And I don't know, it was just this feeling of knowing many different people, being connected to many different people that I really enjoyed.
And so, I think for a lot of people, if you don't work for a giant corporation or run a big corporation or a business, if you're a small business owner, for example, you may not understand the importance of PR. And so maybe if you can kind of put it in layman's terms or how you articulate the value of PR and what it does for a business specifically.
Yeah, of course. I'll try to not use any jargon. I always try to explain it in a way that, let's say you have an incredible product or whatever you do, your technology, your solution is really valuable, in your opinion, to the people, or a lot of people could benefit from it. What's the point of having that great solution if no one knows about it? You somehow need to get that across people. You somehow need to tell your story to the public to be able to even get any attention to it. So I think that's why it's important for every sort of business to think of how they want to communicate their story and what they do to people. I mean, not just the public, any stakeholders, really.
And is it almost kind of about being able to tell the story in your own terms or kind of controlling the narrative? Like, let's say you're Apple or something and people are going to have perceptions about your products, but PR allows you to tell it from your perspective. Is that the importance of it?
100%. I think, let's say you don't talk about what you do at all. At some point, people are going to form an opinion of you. They're going to have an image of you, whether you like it or not. So it's important to, take that control and shape that, as you said, with the narrative that you like or the story that you want to tell about yourself and your business, rather than just letting it flow and allowing people to make up whatever opinion they want to have on it.
And can you maybe kind of elaborate on how you tell that story through PR? I mean, is it just a blog post? Is it the CEO interviewing? Is it through a newsletter? What are the best ways to broadcast that story that is the most effective?
I mean, this is really complex, actually, because if you think of it, there are so many different tools and tactics that you can use in PR. Anything from crisis communications to media relations to corporate social responsibilities. What I would always say is you need to decide how you want to position yourself and which tools would be best to use for your strategies. Let's say you really just want to have good media relations, then that's the route you want to go for, right? You want to speak to journalists, you want to tell your story in the media, you want to get your spokesperson, your CEO, whoever you want in front of the camera to speak to the media and to build that image for you, right? But let's say you're kind of in a completely different direction. You're like, let's say an NGO who kind of just wants to get their message across of we want to do something good for people and we need your help to do it. Then you might want to do other tactics rather than just speaking to media. This could be anything from, having a brand ambassador, working with influencers who kind of share the same morals and ethics as you do, and then bringing that message across. So it really ranges from anything from, pure interviews to work with influencers to any other thing, really.
Do you have any case studies that stand out, maybe from real world experience or when you were going to school and you learned about XYZ person, maybe a celebrity or a business that used PR to really build their brand, or maybe save their reputation, or whatever it is. Maybe if there's something, one particular example that comes to mind.
So I think the one that comes to mind initially is because the public was heavily involved in this. Is one example I could talk to you about is I was working for the German railway while I was doing my internship in Germany, and what had happened there is they were planning this like huge new project in one region in Germany where they would build new railways and like expand their network basically. The issue is this had been going on from like the 90s, and I joined like 20 years later, basically, even longer than that. And they still had an issue going on because the residents in that region were completely against it. They were like, we don't want this new railway here. They were just like worried about what their like town or village is going to look like with the new railway. And this had been going on, as I said, for like 20 years. So what they decided to do is start a public participation program. So they would actually, talk to people, listen to what their worries were, how they would suggest doing it differently so their life or their everyday life doesn't get affected by it that negatively. And it was this huge thing where like different initiatives were involved, like local politicians were involved, and we brought them all together through various means like events or, other networking opportunities to like talk about these things. And I think this was after I left, but they actually managed to agree on one of the solutions and actually started the project after 20 plus years. So I think that's like the power of kind of being that middleman between different stakeholders or different groups that have different interests, and kind of finding that compromise and work on it.
And so you use the word compromise. I'm kind of curious how you think about those types of scenarios when it comes to PR, right? Like, is there always a party? I don't know if you'd call it a losing party, but a party that's not the happiest with the decision, and then whoever it is, the corporation or the government entity, is trying to just allow them to not see that it's all bad? Or I don't know, how do you deal with that part of PR? That the fact that there are oftentimes people are very frustrated with an initiative or a product or a company, and that they are trying to, I don't know, for lack of a better word, save face or
Yeah.
put themselves in a better light when that may not be entirely true.
Okay. I mean, this is kind of something that a lot of people always talk about learning about PR. What's the ethics of it? How do you, keep your ethics and still do this job? I think what we need to realize, though, is as PR professionals, we are hired by our clients, right? So in the end, we technically are an extended arm of the company that we work for. So we will obviously have targets and objectives and, things that the company wants us to achieve for them. So that would obviously, as a professional, be the first goal. However, it's always important, again, because this is about PR and your image and reputation in the public, you need to listen to the people as well. So if you're just sitting there and you're like, I want to tell my story, but I'm not willing to change anything about what I do just because people might not like the way I tell my story, that's where we then need to go back to the client and say, listen, we're trying to find a middle ground here, right? Because A, you want to reach your goals of, let's say, selling more or like raising awareness for whatever your product is. But B, you also have to listen to people, because how are you going to save face, if that makes sense, if you never listen to people and you do your thing and you kind of walk over everyone. So it is a bit of a tricky one, but it's one that everyone kind of has to just figure out for themselves and find that line.
And is that the key for you being successful as a PR agency, or a piece of it is walking that line and kind of being able to balance both sides?
Definitely. I think I do have to say it's one of the advantages of kind of working on your own is you can decide what your work ethics are and how far you're willing to go, or where you draw the line of, listen, what we're doing might not be as ethical anymore, so we need to stop it right here. So I kind of always try to, just I mean, we're all human, right? Even if you have a client in a huge corporation, that's just a human being sitting in front of you asking you to do something for them, right? So it's kind of about just, talking to people, trying to explain why what they want to do might be the wrong way to do things, and trying to tell them that, listen, I have experience, I can find the right way for you so it doesn't end up in an absolute scandal or disaster. So it's kind of about raising that trust in your client that they can just leave it to you to decide how far you go with things, or where you need to stop things, or what the right way to go is.
And what would you say most business owners are getting wrong about PR? Are they just ignoring it completely? Or are they approaching it in the wrong way? What do you see most often?
So what we see most often, especially recently, is actually, with a lot of budget cuts and people trying to, save costs everywhere and trying to make more profit, is that they think PR is kind of just very at the end of the line and we don't need to spend any like effort and budget on actual PR. But then what often happens is when they then end up having some sort of, let's call it like a communications crisis or a scandal that happened, they kind of want help immediately and they want to change things immediately to find a solution for themselves. PR is something that takes time. So it's not something that you can just, pull out of your pocket out of nowhere because you need it in that moment. It's something that you need to build up over the years. And, in the end, it is about building relationships, right? Whether that's with the media, with the public, with other stakeholders. That is something that you need to put time and effort and budget into along the lines, ideally right from the start. That's not something that you can, as I said, just pull out of your pocket because you need it.
Yeah, it's almost being proactive as opposed to reactive.
100%. Yeah.
So
As
you
we
get
said,
you.
like, do you want the public to form their own image of you, or do you want to form that image of yourself and tell your story? So, yeah.
So maybe if we can pivot to kind of back to your story specifically, and I'm curious of that transition from employee to entrepreneur and
Yeah.
why you decided to make that leap or what told you like, hey, I have a viable business that I can build and support myself with.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I have worked in PR for I think about 8 years now, a bit longer than 8 years, and I've worked in various different agencies, mainly in London, actually. Um, and like this was anything from large global agency to small boutique agency, and I have changed agencies quite a bit. I have also worked in house at some point for a US tech startup. So that was then my shift from working on the agency side to working on the client side. And I think that shift especially has made a couple of things really clear for me as a PR professional, because I think there is a bit of a disconnect between what agencies do and how they operate and what clients actually want from them, if that makes sense. Because I think a lot of, especially large global PR agencies, kind of end up being so corporate that they kind of lose a bit of what they're supposed to be doing on the way. Because like the more you grow and the more you start acting like a corporation, you kind of end up losing that whole vibe of a creative agency, of an agency that kind of holds the client's hands and does all the creative and PR work for them. So I kind of realized, okay, there's a bit of a disconnect here. Like, what do we need to do about this? And I also kind of have a feeling, looking at like trends of work recently and how people want to live their lives and work at the moment. I think especially after the pandemic, people want more flexibility and autonomy over their own lives. I think especially younger people. Like, I mean, everyone talks about Gen Z, right? But I think they kind of have a point there where they're a bit like, maybe we don't want that corporate life anymore. Maybe we kind of don't want to find ourselves in this like huge system where we cannot really, show our creativity or our talent and like actually be useful to anyone. So I think we kind of we're shifting away from that a bit in the sense that people kind of want to do impactful work, but kind of more for themselves rather than for making other people rich, if that makes sense. So I think especially that shift and like a lot of people around me also being quite unhappy in that big corporate machine made me realize, I think, for both knowledge workers like myself as well as clients who are looking for these solutions and these services, I think there needs to be a better way to address things. So it seemed a bit more efficient for me to do things slightly differently.
And I'm curious, did you have clients lined up before you went all in, or did you just quit and say, I'm going to figure this out on my own? I'm going to hit the pavement, start cold calling clients to try and bring them on board, or how was that approach?
I didn't actually. Call me crazy, but I think I was just like, you know what, I want to try this. And if I don't try this now, I think I'll never do. So just threw myself into it. But the good thing is, I mean, having worked in different countries with many different people, is a lot of people. So I think I had a good starting point of getting my message across among people that had already worked with me. So they knew how I work, they knew who I was. So that was a good starting point for me. And that's what I did. And yeah, I mean, I'm still in the beginning of everything. So it's still really new and fresh, but there are a couple of exciting things lined up. So we'll see how things go in the next couple of years.
So maybe you can clarify, how long have you been doing Friends and PR? Are you months? Are you a year in?
Just a couple of months. I started in
Okay.
February this year. Yeah, put myself out there, and yeah, ever since have been working on my own brand. Talking to people. The stuff that you do to get yourself out there.
And so I think this is important too. So maybe you can kind of clarify, like you said, you just went for it. If you don't do it now, when will you do it? But did you do other things or set up other things in your life to be able to financially sustain yourself for a year, 2 years while you do this? Or what was your thinking there, right? Because I would imagine that, you don't have whatever it is, $1,000 in your bank account and you said, oh, I'll just figure it out. I would imagine there's planning, but I'm curious.
Well, I mean, I would never, I mean, it would be kind of harsh to say, but if people don't really have that safety and security to be able to maintain themselves for a while, it's a bit of a tricky one to do. So that's something that you really need to think about if you want to start your own business. But if you're lucky enough to tell yourself, hey, I think I can survive a couple of months without having any income, I'm going to try this, and it's worth a shot. And I mean, in the end, I think what we need to realize is if you start something and then you realize, oops, this doesn't go the way I want it to, you just switch it up and then do something else, or you go back to your old working model or whatever it is you were doing before. This is a really kind of like personal thing of you need to decide if this is a risk you're willing to take or not. So yeah, I was lucky enough to be able to say, hey, I think I'm going to try this.
Yeah, and maybe the way you look at it, like, is it less of a risk than people maybe perceive? I mean, to your point, I would imagine you could just go back to a former employer or a PR agency, considering your experience, and get a job. So you say, hey, this is a risk, but it's not life or death, right? I'll be okay. Is that fair?
I think so. And I have a feeling, talking about how things in the work life or like in the work environment have changed over the last couple of years. I think a lot of people have realized that, maybe this whole thing about, climbing the corporate ladder and that safety of a corporate job and everything is not what it used to be, maybe for like our parents or the generations before, looking at things of, cost of living and basically everything around it. So I think back in the day, especially, my parents used to always be like, "Oh, are you sure you want to quit this job? What are you going to do? Is this going to be, you know, something safe for you to do?" I have a feeling that the younger generations are moving away from that a bit because we did realize there will probably always be a way for us out, if that makes sense. If the one thing doesn't work, plan B might work, or if that doesn't work, then you can still, as I said, go back to your old job or whatever it is you were doing. So I don't know. I think this whole thing of thinking that you can never quit a job without having another one is a bit of a tricky one, considering the times that we live in. So, yeah, this might be controversial, but as I said, I think we've moved away from this whole thing of you can never ever quit a job and you need to stay in a company for 20 plus years to be considered loyal or good at your job or whatever it is. I think things are just changing. And I mean, I'm a millennial and I have a Gen Z sister, right? So I think I see a lot of the things that we do in our everyday life or that we think about, how we live and how we work have changed drastically, let's say, compared to our parents. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think kind of this same line of thinking that the cost of failure is so much lower now, right? Like, for example, for
Yeah,
me to start this podcast, I pay $20 a month or whatever it is, $10 a month to
exactly.
Riverside. And that's like the only cost, right? So if it doesn't work, I haven't sunk thousands of dollars into it. And I don't know if that's the same for your business, but maybe you could kind of articulate, like, what did it take for you to even start a business? I would imagine that there is basically no cost, right? It's basically your time. You have to do all the work. You have to find the clients, but you're not paying any employees. There's not any large ongoing monthly costs to run Friends and PR. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's like one of the advantages that knowledge workers have is we technically only need our laptop to do our job, right? So it was the same for me. I mean, the only thing that was kind of that risk that we talked about for me was not having an income. It wasn't actually any money that I spent on it. So if you have an online business or if you have like a job that only requires you and your laptop and an internet connection, then the only thing that you need to start your business is technically investing in like a solid website, a company email, and that's pretty much it. And everything else is just your time that you're spending on expanding, on speaking to people, on doing outreach, cold calls, as you said. Yeah, it was a pretty low risk decision for me to take.
And so maybe you can kind of talk about your thinking or your plan and strategy about how you are going to make it, how you are going to turn this into a profitable business so you don't have to go back to working for corporate PR, and what your strategy is to grow this thing.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, this is a weird thing to say, I think, but the advantage of having worked in different countries also means I have a really big global network of people who are incredibly talented, who are really good at their jobs. And, talking about public relations being about relationships, this is also how usually it works for freelance PR professionals, myself included. Is kind of about, making the most of those relationships, making sure you stay in touch with people, because that way, let's say someone in A country knows, needs help in B country that you're in right now, they can reach out to you and say, hey, listen, I need someone who understands PR in this specific market. Can you help us? So that's kind of one route it can take, just like speaking to a lot of people around you who know a lot of people as well. So a lot of it is actually word of mouth still. So that's, I think, the route that I've taken, because I did realize, cold calls and outreach and everything are incredibly time consuming to do. I mean, I'm not saying they're unnecessary to do. You still need to do them to get your name out there. But I think what people sleep on sometimes is utilizing the relationships and the network that you already have. So, just people who know you already, people who can advocate for you, who can bring other people on board who might need your services. So that's actually a lot of what happened in the last couple of months for me.
And what is your value proposition? So you're leveraging your network, and then what is the value prop? Why go with friends in PR versus another PR firm?
Yeah, so I think so. The model I tried to set up with friends in PR is that I'm basically the sole employee of that company, and it's all based on finding freelancers to work on projects with. So let's say you're a client, you come to me with a specific project or like specific needs. What I am trying to do is actually handpick a team to work for you. So it's actually people who are good enough to do the job that you need to get done, and like do it in a most efficient way, rather than just having a ready team in an agency and they're just going to be like, hey, these people have time, so we're just going to give that client to these people. So it's going to be a hand-picked team for each project. And B, I think what that also means for people like myself, like the knowledge workers on the other side, is they get much more flexibility of, choosing which projects they want to work on, and also, let's say, earning much more from it. Because I don't know if I mentioned, but like nothing of what I do at the moment is kind of heavily profit oriented. The way I do it is, let's say I work with someone on a project that's going to be 50-50. So that's obviously going to be much more than anyone receives from any work that they do at an agency. So I kind of had a feeling this would be, good for both the workers as well as the clients.
And I think you make an interesting point, and this is something I don't understand a lot about, but maybe you can talk to what life is like at a big corporate PR agency, especially if you're just an employee. I mean, is it a lucrative career? Is the pay okay? Is there profit sharing, or is it, here's your base salary, I'm going to tell you what to work on? And, like you mentioned earlier, you can work your way up the ladder and just get slight increases to your pay over time. What does it look like for somebody that's new to the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure people are going to like what I have to say about this one, but having tried that whole thing of climbing the corporate ladder and moving up quite a bit as well, I did realize. So people need to realize that I think early on in your career, it can be incredibly helpful to work for a really large global agency. I think I learned a lot when I did my first couple of years in PR, because you're like exposed to so many different things and you're working on so many different accounts. You're kind of forced to learn all of those things really quickly. So I think I'm really grateful for that, because honestly, everything I do now is basically just because of what I learned back then. But I think like moving up, talking about, as you said, like moving up and, getting promotions, earning more money. I think it's one of those sectors where you're not really being rewarded by loyalty, if that makes sense. So I think if you stay at agency A your whole life, it's going to be really tricky for you to move up and to earn more money, because I mean, you probably know how it works. If you want to move to another company from one company, they're going to have to offer you more money to, you know,
Hmm.
get you over to them. So I think this is something that people really need to keep in mind. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to stay in one place, but people need to consider that things have drastically changed in the last couple of years. So if you really want to move up, if you want to earn more in a short span of time, you need to consider moving around and changing your environment a bit. So yeah. And I mean, it's also working in agencies obviously also doesn't pay as well as, let's say, someone who's lucky enough to end up in an in-house role, or, working for a huge
Mm.
corporation like, I don't know, Google, Apple, whatever it is. So yeah, that's something to keep in mind. And oh
And
yeah,
how
your
much?
other question is, the pay is always just a base pay. So from the countries that I worked at, which would be Germany, UK, and Turkey, it was always just your negotiated salary, and that's pretty much it.
And how much of that reality influenced you to say, "All right, I'm out of here. I see so much more potential on my own." Was that a big catalyst for you?
So I think it was slightly different for me in the sense that when I moved to Turkey about 2 years ago, I was doing freelance work for a US company. So I kind of already started doing that whole thing on my own when I moved here. And it kind of stayed that way. And I did some other freelance work. I did also work as an employee for an agency here. So it kind of had the mix of doing freelance work, but also being employed somewhere. And I think I realized, hey, I kind of started doing this already and it kind of worked out for me in the last couple of years. Maybe I should do this my full time thing and try to just focus on doing my freelance work. And then decided to start Friends in PR to bring other people on board with me who can then work with me on projects.
Okay. And I'm curious too, you mentioned freelancers a bit, right? And I think there are tons of freelancers today across all different types of services. Maybe you can
Yeah.
speak to how, and maybe again it's leveraging your network, maybe it's something else, how you know that the freelancers you pick and work with are going to create high quality work. Because I think going back again, talking about earlier about a company's reputation, right? Your reputation's on the line when you
Yeah.
assign a freelancer to work with a client of Friends and PR. So maybe what's your process there to ensure the highest quality work is being completed?
Yeah, I mean, you'll never be able to eliminate 100% of the risk, right? But with me, so the people that I'm in touch with at the moment for a couple of future projects are people that I have worked with in the past. So I know how they work, I know how they operate, I know that they do deliver high quality work. So I kind of trust that they are going to do that in the future as well. And with everything else, I mean, it's the same as just a regular company trying to hire someone, right? You're going to have to be able to speak to people, figure out who the best fit is for you, and then just go with that risk. Because in the end, you're never going to be 100% sure that everything is going to work out, right? You need to kind of test it and learn.
Hmm. Okay. And then I'm curious too about the way you structured your business. We talked about it a bit, like being a solopreneur. Are you 100% committed to this style of business where it's only going to be you for the foreseeable future, the entirety of your career building this? Or are you open to saying, hey, if I really want to grow this, I may need to hire some actual employees and grow the company that way? Or are you just a solopreneur the whole way through?
I mean, I would never say never. I think in the beginning, it's probably quite good to kind of get everything sorted, to do things on your own, and then see how things go. But I would always be completely open to having partners on board. I think that's also quite a likely scenario for the next couple of months, actually. But the thing is, I would still never ever make it a usual agency where you just have employees on board with a certain salary that are just going to be there for you to, work with. I would still make it dependent on the projects that I work on and who's involved in which project and who, earns which money from which project. I would always want to make sure that it's spread equitably rather than just having one person who sits there and does all the job for you.
And so it's more of like a 1099, or at least that's what they call it in the US, versus like a W-2 employee. You're not just going to be paying salaries. It's going to be based on work completed. And
Yeah. No, 100%. I think people deserve to get the money from a project that they actually worked on. So rather than, filling the pockets of someone else, I think people should be able to, get the money out of the work that they actually did. And I think everyone deserves it. And I have a feeling it also really raises people's quality of work as well. Because if you're really happy with the work that you do, if you're really motivated, if you know that you're going to get that money for the work that you do, I think your quality of work is automatically going to be much higher as well.
I'm curious, I think you have some pretty strong opinions about the future of work. You mentioned Gen Z, millennials don't want to be in the corporate culture anymore. I mean, do you see this as a trend in general for PR? I would imagine that there are others following a similar path as you, saying, hey, I can, with all this technology and my network, I can set this up on my own and run it relatively cheaply and efficiently. I mean, do you see this as a trend continuing in the future where the large agencies maybe have less of a market share in the business, and it kind of begins to fracture off or almost like democratize into smaller firms like yourself? How are you thinking about that?
I mean, ideally, that would be amazing. Realistically, I think we need to realize that old systems are really difficult to break down. And even if that was the case, which I doubt it will be, I have a feeling there might be other examples and other people who will, start a similar work model or do things slightly differently rather than how we were used to. There are always going to be people like that. And I have a feeling the number of those people is going to rise as well in the next couple of years. But I'm not sure it's going to replace the old system completely. And even if it did, I think that would take a long, long time. Because in the end, those large companies, those large agencies are that big for a reason because people trust their names. People trust that that name is, associated with high quality work, with reputation, with prestige and everything. It is sometimes quite difficult to move companies away from that and say, hey, I do realize that agency has a really good reputation and they look really cool on paper, but maybe you're better off with a boutique agency or a smaller freelance team. So I think we're going to have to wait and see, but it's going to be difficult to completely replace that old system.
And another topic I want to talk about is kind of, hot button topic, but just AI in general. How will that affect PR? I mean, I think it's pretty clear at this point in time it can't replace somebody completely, but it seems like an industry that where it will be heavily involved. And maybe you could speak to how you've seen it already implemented or how you're planning on implementing it. What do you see the role you see it holding in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not one of those people who are running around being all panicky that AI is going to take over our jobs. I don't think that's going to be the case. And I feel like, especially for PR professionals, that would be kind of weird, right? Because how is AI going to manage relationships? That's just not something that AI can do really easily. So you're always going to need that human factor in that equation. But I do think, to be honest, I'm all pro using AI and tech advancements because in the end, they're there to make our lives easier as well, right? So, let's say back in the day, a PR person would, send out press releases that were handwritten by mail, right? Like that would take you ages rather than now you just type something on an email and you click send. So, those things are there to kind of make your life easier and more time efficient and, get the work done much quicker. So I think it's going to be the same with AI. I do think there are a couple of fields in PR that can really benefit from using AI because you can, as I said, just save a lot of time on them, whether that's, uh, improving content or, any sort of, written content that you want to produce. I think that can help a lot. But I don't think it's ever going to be a huge part of what we do. Because as I said, in the end, our job is to kind of chat to as many people as we can and build those relationships.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I mean, there's a huge human element in PR, right? So I don't think that's going away.
Yeah, it would be tricky. Well, maybe in 200 years or something, but we'll never know.
Yeah, yeah. And so let's kind of talk about, so Friends of PR is new. You're trying to grow. You're trying to sustain this thing. What is the biggest focus of yours over the next month? What is the biggest roadblock to growth currently that you're working on? How do you plan on addressing it?
I mean, the one big thing for me is to really just get started on work that I can actually share as my own work. Because you might know how it always takes time in the beginning, right? You need to get new clients on board. You need to actually start working on something to then be able to showcase the work that you did. My focus is on, starting a couple of projects to then be able to, showcase them as my work and be like, hey, listen, I've started already. Friends in PR is working with this company on this project and we've done really good work, to then be able to reach out to even more people to say, listen, this is what we're doing, do you need help as well, we can help you. So like the one big thing for me now is to actually get started on the PR work. And that's what I'm focusing on this summer. I think there are a couple of things lined up that I'm really looking forward to. So once I've worked on those, I think I have a much better idea of where I want to take things and how I can move forward from that.
So, and this is a theme that's come up in other conversations. Are you planning to kind of leverage also those testimonials? So if you complete great work for somebody, hey, tell 2 other businesses that you work with that I'd love to work with them. I mean, is that almost a growth strategy? Is that, hey, goodwill and good work will kind of compound on its own, as opposed to, you mentioned it earlier, being very time consuming, just cold calling people, cold outreach. Is that an intentional strategy?
Oh, for sure, 100%. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I think word of mouth is still a really huge thing in our industry. Um, And like the one big thing that you can utilize is having clients that already worked with you and that were really happy with your work, right? I mean, they're going to be your best advertising anyway, whether that's through, as you said, testimonials, spreading that online and raising awareness for your business, or whether that's just, in your personal life. Because I mean, in the end, I did realize, even globally or in all of the countries that I worked in, the sector is really small, so I feel like everyone knows everyone. Like you always end up meeting the same people everywhere. So that's why you also need to really, lean into those relationships, because like that person might know someone else at another huge company that needs PR help. So they're going to be like, hey, there's this person that I worked with. Do you want me to introduce you to? So that's definitely the one thing I want to focus on the most. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to have to, do other things to raise awareness for myself. So, any things from content online to, reaching out to all sorts of other things.
And so you've been doing this for a couple months, so relatively new to being a solopreneur and entrepreneur. Is
Yeah.
there anything that you've learned over these past few months, or any advice you'd give to somebody that's maybe still in a corporate job but thinking about, taking the plunge like you did? What would you recommend, or what have you learned so far?
This is going to sound really cliche, but don't be scared to make mistakes. You're just going to have to trial and error your way through it. So just try different things, see what works for you, see what doesn't. Don't get like pushed back or upset if something doesn't work out the way you expected it to, because as I said, you're going to try different paths to find out which one works for you. And that also means that most of the time, especially in the beginning, a lot of things that you do are not going to really, have a result or bring you any business or help you in any way. So you really just need to get yourself out there, try different things, see what works for you, see what gives you the results that you're expecting, and just roll with it. So, yeah. And that also includes, note to myself to not think too much about how other people might perceive what you're doing. Because, you'd always think, if I started my own business, people are going to be watching and seeing if, what I do, what work I get, and all that sort of stuff. But in the end, it's just what you do with it. So don't think too much about other people. Don't think too much about any past mistakes you've made, and just get on with it.
So how do you deal with that? I guess rejection might be a good word, when you try something and it doesn't land the customer, or you produce a piece of content and it doesn't get much attention. How do you, right? Because there's like a decision point there. Okay, do I try something else, keep going? Or, at any point you could say, okay, do I just go back and get a job at an agency and work for someone else? So how do you specifically and personally decide to keep going? Is there anything you do specifically?
So I do have to say, talking about my network again, I do have a lot of PR people around me. My partner is actually a PR manager as well, so I'm kind of like really in that industry, and a lot of my friends are too. So what always helps me personally is to have a second pair of eyes on things, because, especially when you're really fresh in the whole solopreneur thing, or you're doing this for just a couple of months and you still don't quite know how to do things, it's always really helpful to rely on your social circles. As I said, especially if you have other PR people around you, it's really helpful for me to speak to them, to run ideas past them, to say, hey, do you think this makes sense? What would you think if you saw this online? And it's really helpful to then just, sit down, maybe brainstorm with them, figure out different ways of doing things, and then just, try it. And I mean, timings wise, it's always difficult, because it is a bit tricky to decide, as you said, when you need to put an end to things and say, hey, this didn't work, so I have to try it in a different way. But again, it's still so new and fresh for me, especially, that I just need to, try things a bit longer. Because I think, again, even figuring out that something didn't work takes time. Because just because, I mean, we talked about attention and likes and things like that, right? Just because you put something out there and only got like 2 or 3 likes doesn't mean you just stop it immediately. And that, that just means you need to kind of continue and raise more awareness, because everything takes time. I mean, think about it like, an influencer doing content creation on Instagram or whatever it is. They start with 0 followers and 0 likes, right? So you need to somehow, work your way up a bit to even be able to get your content out to as many people as possible. So it takes time, I would say.
Yeah, patience is key, right?
Sure.
So looking back, maybe advice to your younger self, looking back at your career and what you know now, what would you tell your younger self?
I would probably say, again, do not worry about making mistakes. Making a mistake is not the end of the world, because I used to think that way. I used to think everything has to be perfect. I need to be good at everything I do, and everything else is unacceptable. I think that's a really kind of self-sabotaging way of doing things. So would definitely say just try things. And if you make a mistake, then that's it. You just move on from it. And other than that, I would probably also say, try to focus on, or like figure out the things that you enjoy for yourselves quite early on, because otherwise you're just going to get dragged into a specific direction in your career that might not be the best for you. So I think it's really good to kind of have a solid idea of the things that you do like to do and that you're actually good at quite early on, and then focus on those rather than being, scattered all over the place. So those two things for me would probably be the main ones I would tell my younger self.
And so for this next question, I mean, you're kind of already doing it, but I'm curious, or maybe let's say that you've lost absolutely everything, or you're at a point where you can no longer financially sustain yourself for friends and PR. How are you starting over? What are you building?
I mean, that's a tricky one. I don't know if I would see that as a complete failure of trying a different work model and go back to a corporate life, or whether I would think, hey, maybe my approach was right, but the way I carried things out wasn't. So maybe I would try it a different ways. Um, I don't know if that would mean starting another online business where I have really low costs of starting and then, trying that, or whether that would mean, as I said, going back to a corporate life. I think that's something I just need to see for myself over the next couple of months. So if nothing works, I'll have to see if I want to continue being a solopreneur or go back to the corporate life.
Yeah, very cool. Well, hey, I appreciate you taking the time and, talking through all this with me. It sounds like, you have a plan and you're going to execute on it. So, hey, I wish you the best of luck in the future. But Aylin, to close this out, any final thoughts, anything you haven't mentioned yet, and where can people find you?
I mean, honestly, again, don't be too worried about what society tells you is the important thing to do, or what other people think of you, or whatever. Just throw yourself out there, do the things that you enjoy doing, try new things. And even if that means you're going to fail and go back to what you did before, at least you tried. And yeah, I think that's my message for everyone. And yeah, everyone can find me under my name on LinkedIn or Instagram. You can also find Friends in PR on LinkedIn, or the website, myfriendsinpr.com. And yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch, that's how to find me.
Awesome, Aylin. Thanks again. Yeah, and I'll link all that stuff in the description. And yeah, best of luck with Friends in
All
PR.
right. It was great chatting to you, Connor. Thank you.
Thanks.